Part 1. Initiation and the Protocol of Cruel Truths. Time is not a metric in the Archivum. It is a weapon. The moment she stepped into Security Corridor 3 Gamma, Run felt it. The place was gray and dead, steeped in heavy shadow, only occasionally torn apart by the flickering beam of Kael's helmet-mounted floodlight. A low, drawn-out alarm, like the screech of twisting metal, reverberated from the deep. 19 minutes, Run, Kael said, his voice completely dry, devoid of temperature or empathy, like rock dust. He walked ahead, his strides long and unwavering. The Archivum is not a library. It does not store books. It is a prison for concepts that should not exist and the entities created from those concepts. And right now, those entities are knocking. Run, still reeling from the 48 hours of hyper-accelerated training, struggled to keep pace. She was merely a low-level technician called up as an emergency replacement. The smell of burning ozone and rusted metal stung her lungs. I tried to prepare, Rin gasped. No one prepares for the Archivum, Kael replied without turning his head. You are not welcome. You are a disposable resource. Your sole mission is to reach the core server room, load the backup fuse, and reactivate the reality filter field before the emergency power drains completely. If that happens, we have a level 5 reality collapse. Everything within a 10-mile radius will be reorganized into things that cannot be described. They took a sharp turn into security level beta. The wailing of the alarm suddenly grew louder, almost a cry. Kael stopped abruptly before a heavy steel door marked Containment Cell Number 4. Protocol 1. The Witness of Truth, Kael declared, his voice lowered but still sharp. Look here. He raised his hand, but not to flip a switch. He pointed to a thick glass viewport on the door. The most critical thing you need to learn. Do not look directly into viewport number 4. Ren instinctively tilted her head. Why? No questions. Kael snapped. He grabbed Ren's arm, squeezing hard enough to make her wince, and forced her to cover her own eyes tightly with her palm. You may only hear, not see. If you see, your mind will be improved. Kael shined his floodlight onto a security officer standing still, facing the opposite wall. The man wore the standard Archivum uniform but was perfectly motionless. That is Officer Davis. He was curious, Kael explained. Entity number 4 is not a predator or a pain inducer. It is a thief of purposeful memory. Davis looked at it too long, and Entity number 4 convinced Davis that he is not a security officer. Currently, he believes he is a ceiling light. Ren could feel her breath catch. She listened to Davis's silence, the perfect stillness of a man who believed his function was to illuminate a corner of the room. If you open your eyes, you too will see the logic in its argument, Kael continued. You will start to believe you are a valve, a switch, or perhaps a stain on the floor. This is the Archivum's first lesson, Ren. Curiosity doesn't just kill you. It turns you into something else, an inert component in the system. Kael pulled Ren's hand from her eyes, but only after he had shut off the light aimed at Davis. Maintain clinical cruelty and emotional precision. We have 16 minutes left. Part 2. Playing with Psychology and Deadly Opposition. They continued deeper, the alarm now a familiar hum, the painful pulse of the Archivum. They entered an area of anomalous color, where the emergency lighting was a sickly green, creating a sensation of being underwater. This is Entity Gamma's containment chamber, Kael said, pointing to a complex panel jutting out from the wall. This requires the maintenance of a subtle emotional balance. Protocol 2. Emotional discipline, Kael stated, his finger pointing at a display screen flashing the words, Status, JOY. Entity Gamma did not exist in physical form but as pure psychic energy. It fed on emotion, and it was currently craving joy. Protocol 2. The Entity Gamma's psychic classification system must be set to regret, not joy. If it is fed joy, it will strengthen and warp the physical space around it. This requires cold accuracy. Kael took a step back. You do it. I will supervise. If you hesitate for a millisecond, it may have already fed enough. Ren approached the panel. The keys were cold under her fingers. She saw the access code and the reset procedure on a slip of paper already tucked into her hand. She had to input a long string of characters, then confirm the emotional transition. As she typed the code, a faint moan, almost a sad sigh, echoed from within the containment chamber. It was the sound of Entity Gamma destroying itself, being forced to consume its most repulsive meal. Pure regret. Good, Kael whispered as the screen faded to gray and displayed status. Regret. That entity will remain at its weakest until power is restored. The Archivum demands cruelty. Ren. Compassion is the cause of containment breach. They pressed on, passing an office sealed off with caution tape. Inside, Consultant T sat rigidly at his desk. He was alive, but his body twitched constantly, his eyes glued to two computer screens. Protocol 3, the terror of logic, Kael introduced without slowing down. That is Consultant T. He is parasitized by two entities in his brain, each representing a conflicting logical imperative. Ren glanced in. Consultant T's left screen displayed, Command. Unlock Bay 7 Alpha and release all, while the right screen displayed, Command. Activate Global SafeLock and seal everything. Protocol 3. Never interfere with Consultant T's dual readout screens. Kael explained. Consultant T survived wretchedly in a state of perfect equilibrium between two impossible, contradictory commands. Any attempt to help him by turning off a screen or choosing a command would immediately cause the two parasitic entities to cooperate. Not to escape, but to tear apart the intervening staff member. The logical insanity of the system is his only protection, Kael concluded. The lesson here, Ren, don't try to fix what is broken. Sometimes logical destruction is the most stable state. Part 3. Erosion and Potential Betrayal. They entered an old maintenance sector, where high humidity made the air thick. The smell of rusted metal and stagnant water was heavy. This was the forgotten part of the Archivum, where threats didn't explode but slowly infiltrated. 11 minutes, Kael growled. He led Ren to a cracked wall. From a small fissure, an ancient, brass, heavily rusted faucet protruded. It was dripping, forming a small pool of water on the floor. Protocol 4. The hidden danger, Kael said, pointing at the faucet. Protocol 4. Absolutely do not drink from the east hidden faucet. Ren found this ridiculous. Who would drink water from such a place? The betrayer entity does not need violence to escape, Kael explained. It is a metaphysical microbe. It doesn't kill you instantly. It infiltrates. The toxin slowly erodes the staff member's memory of security rules and lockdown procedures. The victim then, entirely unwittingly, opens crucial containment bays, becoming the betrayer entity's instrument without ever knowing. This was the most terrifying threat. Losing one's own security knowledge, being turned into an unaware pawn. Kael handed Ren a makeshift wrench from his coat pocket. I want you to not just avoid it. I want you to neutralize it. Tighten this faucet. Lock it down. Muzzle the potential betrayal. The Archivum does not accept passive avoidance of potential destruction. Ren followed, trembling. The rusted metal scraped her hand. She had to use all her strength to tighten the valve, halting the last few drops of toxic water from hitting the floor. The action offered no salvation, only a desperate act of maintenance against the erosion of perception itself. Part 4. The Dissolution of Reality. They were very close to the core server. The effects of the power loss were making the space chaotic. Lights flashed out of sync. The temperature dropped suddenly and then became scorching hot. Kael walked along a narrow corridor where severed cables sparked with static electricity. Around one corner, they discovered a heavy metal door. It had no number, no identifying mark, and it was unsealed, slightly ajar. Just enough for a person to squeeze through. Inside the gap was not darkness. It was a color without a name, a color both too much and too little all at once, making Ren feel nauseous. Kael shouted a warning, the first time he had displayed any emotion other than clinical coldness. "Turn your face, Ren." Immediately, Ren quickly complied. Her heart hammered in her chest. "Protocol 5, the concrete wall," Kael practically yelled into her ear. "Protocol 5. If you see an unlocked passage without a number, pretend it is a solid concrete wall," he explained. "That door leads to a corrupted dimension, a pure disturbance of reality. Stepping into it wouldn't kill her, but it would convert her into non-Euclidean geometry. What she saw was not reality. If you acknowledge it as a door, you will be drawn in and reorganized into a non-existent shape. You must believe in the structure of the Archivum more than what your eyes are telling you. Pretend it is not there." Kael pushed Ren tight against the opposite wall. He used all his strength to force her eyes shut. "Walk. Treat it like a solid wall. Trust the protocol, not your senses." Ren walked, her body rigid, every step an act of denial. She felt the cold, undefined draft from the opening caress her skin, heard the groaning of warped physics, but she forced herself to believe she was walking along a solid concrete partition. "Good," Kael whispered once they were past it. 8 minutes. We are there." Part 5. The Countdown and Final Judgment. They burst into the core server room. The air was painfully cold and filled with static. Thousands of cables hung down like dead vines. The countdown timer on the main console flashed red. 02:47. "This is the endpoint," Kael said, heading straight for the core fuse box, a large, antique-looking steel mechanism. "Protocol 6. The time limit," Kael declared, his voice carrying absolute gravity. "Protocol 6. Inspect and reload the core fuse box before 3 o'clock hours." He explained that this fuse was the single cable sustaining the reality filter field, an energetic shield that kept the Archivum from being consumed by the exterior reality, the one it was locking away. Kael handed Ren the new core fuse, heavy and cold. "Simple task. Swap the old one, install the new. If you do this correctly, the Archivum gains another 3 weeks before this fuse needs replacing." Kael stepped back, arms crossed. He made no move to help, though the time was draining rapidly. Ren looked at the core fuse box. The pressure of time, the disgust from viewport number 4, the psychic stress from entity gamma, the fear of hidden betrayal, and the shock of denying reality. It all compressed within her. Kael ended with a cold, almost whispered declaration, his voice the final judgment. "The test is not installing the fuse, Ren. Any technician can do that. The test is the ability to install it after you know 5 ways you could have died in 10 minutes, converted into a light fixture, forced to feed on regret, torn apart by logic, slowly poisoned into a betrayer, or warped into a spatial geometry. If you fail here, you are a security threat. If you succeed, the Archivum has a new employee. 70 seconds. Prove you are not an experiment." In the tense silence of the core server room, Ren placed the heavy core fuse into the slot. Her fingers, though trembling, worked with the precise accuracy Kael had taught her. The countdown ticked toward 2 o'clock. Security Corridor 3 Gamma was submerged in organized chaos. Darkness swallowed everything, save for the cold white beam of light cutting across from Kael's helmet lamp. That light stripped bare the deep fissures, looking like open wounds, across the reinforced concrete walls. The alarm bell was not a shriek of panic, but a low, continuous moan, a constant reminder that time was dying. 20 minutes? Kael ground out. his voice flattened and emotionless by the metallic filter, cutting through the low whine like a knife. He did not look back at Run, who was panting behind him. The Archivum is not a repository for books. It is a prison for concepts and entities that, if released, would turn your reality into a cruel joke. You are not welcome here, Ren. You are merely a replacement part, a tool to reach the core server room before the backup power expires. Failure will result in a reality disaster level 5. Not simply death, but reconstruction into something that cannot die. Ren, her protective suit brand new and unscuffed, struggled to keep pace with his long strides. Cold sweat broke out despite the dropping temperature in the corridor. They reached security level beta. Kael stopped abruptly before a heavy steel door marked with Aperture 4. He raised a hand, signaling an immediate stop. "This is Protocol 1, Kael said, dropping his voice to a whisper. "Do not look directly into Aperture 4. Ren started to ask, but Kael barked the command brutally. "Cover your eyes, Ren. Don't just close them. Press the palms of your hands tightly against them. Do not let the smallest sliver of light leak through." Ren obeyed in confusion and fear. She heard the distinct click of Kael's high-intensity flashlight activating. "Entity 4, Kael continued, his voice dripping with contempt, "is the memory structure eater. It doesn't kill. It merely swaps. Look, Ren." Kael shined his light onto a security officer in a blue uniform, who was standing motionless, facing the wall, right beside a broken ceiling light fixture. The officer did not react, did not blink. He was completely static. Entity 4 stole his memory of who he is and replaced it with the memory of an inanimate object. He currently believes he is a ceiling lamp. He will stand there until his battery runs out. Curiosity doesn't just kill you, Ren. It turns you into something else. And in the Archivum, turning into something else is worse than death. Kael turned off the light, and the darkness swallowed the terrifying image. He pulled Ren's hands away. "First lesson. The truth here is what kills you, unless you are ordered to look at it. Move. We have 17 minutes. The psychological pressure mounted as they entered the Gamma Entity containment chamber. This was a cylindrical zone where psychic fields were used instead of steel. The air here was thick and smelled of artificial mint, designed to disrupt the senses. They halted before the main control panel, where a large digital display showed a complex oscillation chart and 3 emotional options: joy, fear, and regret. Entity Gamma is an emotion feeder. It must be fed to maintain containment, Kael explained, his eyes fixed on the screen. Currently, it is being fed fear, a stable but inefficient energy source. Protocol 2. You must set the Entity Gamma psychological classification system to regret, not joy. Ren felt her throat go dry. If I select joy, Entity Gamma will absorb that energy, gain strength in seconds, and warp the space. You will be twisted into an impossible shape before your body even registers what happened. Choosing incorrectly is not a mistake, Ren. Choosing incorrectly is a physical catastrophe. Kael stepped back, arms crossed over his chest. You do it yourself. Input the code, confirm, and activate regret. You must be precise. Ren hesitated, her fingers trembling as they touched the cold control panel. She entered the code. The moment she pressed the regret button, a weak, drawn-out, agonizing moan echoed from deep within the core of the containment sphere. It was the sound of something intentionally self-destructing in full awareness. Ren shivered, but she had performed correctly. Precise, Kael said clinically. The Archivum demands ruthlessness and emotional accuracy. Your personal feelings are irrelevant. Only the stability of the protocol matters. They continued, stepping through a small, abandoned office space where an elderly man, dressed in a consultant's uniform, sat huddled under a desk. He was shaking, and the two computer screens before him flashed continuously, displaying two contradictory commands: Unlock Bay 7 Maintenance and Global Safety Lock. Immediately. Consultant T, Kael introduced casually. He is currently hosting two parasitic logic entities. Protocol 3. Never interfere with Consultant T's dual readout screens. Ren looked at the consultant, who was silently weeping. He is suffering. Why don't we choose one command to free him from the loop? Because the logic loop is the only thing keeping him alive. The two entities are fighting each other. If you choose one side, the two entities will suddenly cooperate to tear apart the intervening staff member. You cannot fix the system's insanity, Ren. You can only accept it and pass through. Move quickly. They rushed down a steep steel staircase leading into the old maintenance section. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of rusted metal and burnt ozone. The countdown timer showed 12 minutes remaining. The threat is not always a scream or a monster, Kael said, stopping at a dark, obscure corner. In the corner, near a tangled mess of pipes, there was a tiny brass faucet, dripping sluggishly onto the floor. Protocol 4. Absolutely do not drink the water from the east hidden faucet. The fluid from this faucet is contaminated with entity the betrayer. Ren frowned. Poisoned water? Isn't that just regular toxic exposure? No. The betrayer does not kill quickly. It penetrates the nervous system and slowly erodes the staff member's memory of security rules and lockdown procedures. The victim will remain alive and work normally, but they will unknowingly open critical containment compartments, becoming an instrument of betrayal until it is too late. This is perfect betrayal. Self-sabotage through unconsciousness. Kael rummaged in his toolkit and tossed an old wrench to Ren. Prove that you not only heard the protocol but also have the capacity to deal with it. Secure that valve tightly. You must ensure that not one more drop of water is dispersed. If you leave any trace, another staff member might drink it next week, and you will be responsible for the disaster they cause. Ren knelt, her hand touching the cold, slimy metal. Under Kael's pressure, she trembled but gripped the wrench tightly. She exerted all her strength to twist the valve shut, feeling the metal screech until the last drop of water stopped dripping. It was a simple action, but it demanded intense focus on maintenance duty rather than panic. Good, Kael commented, without the slightest sign of satisfaction. Precision. 8 minutes left. They were deep underground. The closer they got to the core server room, the more severe the effects of the power loss became. Lights flashed erratically, their rhythm completely chaotic. Ren felt as though she was losing her sense of direction. The reality filtering field effect is weakening, Kael warned. Non-existent objects are beginning to leak in. This is when mistakes are easiest to make. They rounded a corner into a long, straight hallway. Right in the middle of the concrete wall, where there should have been a solid block, there was a heavy metal door with no number or identifying mark that had been forced open and stood slightly ajar. Inside was only static white. Kael yelled, "Turn away! Close your eyes immediately!" Kael grabbed Ren's shoulder, swinging her forcefully, forcing her to turn her back to the door. Protocol 5. If you see an unlabeled unlocked entryway, pretend it is a concrete wall. That door leads to a corrupted dimension. It will physically distort anyone who steps inside. It will not kill, but it will rearrange your body into an impossible geometry. You are looking at an invitation to dissolution. But it is a door, Ren stammered. Kael pushed Ren hard against the opposite wall, forcing her to walk. You do not see it. You do not recognize it. It is concrete. Your belief in the protocol must be stronger than what your eyes see. Walk through. Ren, in terror and absolute obedience, squeezed her eyes shut, shuffling close to the cold wall as if forcing herself through a narrow corridor. She walked past the location of the non-door, feeling the coldness of the corrupted space leaking out beside her. When she opened her eyes, she was on the other side. The door was still there, inviting, but they had passed it. Kael gasped, showing a sign of strain for the first time. Only 4 minutes. Speed. They burst into the core server room. The air was bone-chillingly cold, and a powerful static electrical hum enveloped everything. The towering server racks glowed with red warning lights. On the main control panel, a vibrant red digital clock displayed 02:47. This is the endpoint, Kael stated, needing almost no explanation. It's running on fumes. Kael handed Ren a new core fuse box, heavy, ice-cold metal. Protocol 6, check and replace the core fuse box before 3 a.m. This is the single lifeline maintaining the reality filtering field. If it expires, everything we are holding will leak into the world, and everything in the Archivum will be swallowed by that world. He pointed to a small, locked compartment at the very bottom of the main control panel. The task is simple. Remove the old one, install the new one. 30 seconds is enough. But I will not help you. Kael stood still, like a sentinel statue. Ren stepped forward, her heart pounding in her ears. 10 minutes ago, she was a novice, but now she had been forced to impose cruelty, Protocol 2, accept systemic madness, Protocol 3, perform vital maintenance, Protocol 4, and reject visual evidence, Protocol 5. All those experiences condensed into this moment, paralyzing pure anxiety, but replacing it instead with disciplined tension. Kael finished, his words echoing in the static room. The test is not the fuse installation, Ren. Installing the fuse is a trivial action. The test is the ability to install it after you know 5 ways you could be distorted, corroded, or erased in 10 short minutes. Your composure now is what we buy. If you fail due to fear, you are a security threat and I will neutralize you. If you succeed, the Archivum has a new staff member. Kael stepped back, his headlamp shining directly on Ren. Prove that you are not an experiment. Ren reached out a trembling hand toward the fuse compartment, feeling the cold security key in her grasp. The countdown clock flashed. 02:35. She began to turn the lock. The security corridor 3 Gamma was drowned in an oppressive silence, only distorted by the frantic, grating pulse of the emergency alarm. A sound like metal grinding bone. Kael led the way, his helmet lamp cutting a thin, desperate beam through the gloom. The Archivum isn't a library, Ren. It is a press, a filter, and a sieve for reality itself. We don't archive books, we imprison concepts. Things that should not be allowed to exist. Kael's voice was low, colder than the condensing air around them. You are not a welcome replacement, Ren. You are replacement material. Your sole mission, reach the core server room. 20 minutes. If the auxiliary power fails, the reality filter field collapses. Catastrophe level 5. The entire planet becomes an incomplete thought. They advanced into the beta-level security zone. Kael stopped abruptly before Cell 4. Protocol 1. Do not look directly into observation port 4. He clamped a heavy, gloved hand over Ren's eyes, pressing hard. Keep them shut. Tight. Kael shone his light on a slumped security guard huddled motionless in the hallway corner. Entity 4 doesn't consume flesh. It consumes perception. That man's name was Tobias. Now he believes he is the fluorescent light fixture illuminating Corridor 3 Gamma. Curiosity won't just kill you, Ran. It will turn you into office furniture. Next came the containment bay for Entity Gamma, an area protected by a throbbing magnetic field. Kael shoved Ren toward a control panel. Protocol 2. You must set the psychological classification system to regret, not joy. He pointed to a blinking monitor displaying complex emotional sine waves. Gamma feeds on emotion. If you feed it joy, it strengthens and bends space. It will kill you with pure ecstasy. Input the code. Ren. Set it to regret. Ren's hands trembled as she entered the sequence. A dry, rasping moan, like tearing metal, echoed from the containment unit. It was the sound of controlled self-immolation. The Archivum demands cruelty, Ren. Precise, clinical apathy. They passed the sealed office of Advisor T. He sat inside, staring vacantly at two separate screens displaying contradictory commands, Unlock Bay 7 and Global Safety Lock. Kael whispered, Protocol 3. Never intervene with Advisor T's dual readout screen. Kael explained that Advisor T was host to two parasitic entities within his brain. They sustained him in a state of eternal logical conflict. If you try to help him by choosing one command, the two entities instantly cooperate. They will tear apart anyone who breaks this insane equilibrium. Do not fix what is broken, Ren. Accept that madness is a form of stability within the Archivum. They left the main containment area and entered a network of old maintenance tunnels, a forgotten sprawl of the Archivum's failing architecture. The air changed instantly. The darkness was not merely a power outage, but thick with grime and cobwebs. High humidity condensed, heavy with the smell of ozone and wet, rusting metal. Their footsteps echoed with a dry, hollow clank on the checkered metal floor. 12 minutes remaining, Kael stated, not turning around. His voice was now diluted by a faint, persistent trickling sound. They navigated a cluster of old pipes where steam dripped, pooling faintly on the floor. Ren realized the trickling came from a dark corner, tucked behind a dead pump. There was a small, heavily corroded brass faucet, still slowly dripping. The east-hidden faucet. Kael halted, his headlamp fixed on the innocuous fixture. Protocol 4, Kael said, his voice laced with a contempt deeper than common fear. Under no circumstances drink the water from the east-hidden faucet. Not if you're dying of thirst, not if you see someone else drinking, and not even if the Archivum is actively burning down around you. Ren felt her throat strangely constrict. It was a purely psychological reaction. She forced the feeling down. Is it poisoned? Poisoned in the conventional sense? No, Kael scoffed. That fixture is infected with the betrayer entity, a particularly hideous strain. Kael elaborated, forcing Ren to listen despite the dwindling clock. This was not a place for haste, but for a thorough understanding of death. This poison does not kill you with physical toxins, Kael continued. It is a protocol paralytic. Once ingested, over the next few hours you will forget every security rule, every key code, every containment procedure you have ever learned. You'll remember your mother's name. You'll remember how to tie your boots. But everything related to keeping the Archivum secure will be eroded into a gaping void. Ren stared at the faucet. It dripped. Asterisk tick. Tick. Asterisk. The victim shows up for work the next day, perfectly normal, but with a fatal cognitive hole. They will walk through delta stabilization, thinking the code 7-5-9-1 unlocks the amorphous entity container, when it is, in fact, the emergency lockdown code. They become unwitting tools of betrayal, a sleeper agent triggered by their own thirst. Kael pointed at the faucet. We lost 5 personnel to the betrayer last month. All people who believed they just needed one sip to get through a long shift. We do not have time to legally repair that pipe, Kael said. But we do not proceed if this threat vector remains active. Not every protocol is defensive, Ren. Some are preemptive strikes. He threw a heavy, oil-caked wrench into Ren's hand. It was cold and heavy. This is a test of initiative, replacement material, Kael commanded. You will use that to tighten the main stopcock on that faucet. You must seal it completely, tight enough that not a single drop can flow out for the next 72 hours. You must prove you can destroy the vectors of slow corruption, not just avoid them. Begin immediately. Ren hesitated. She felt weary and sick, and the thought of grappling with something so filthy and slick repulsed her. But Kael stood motionless, his headlamp fixed on her face. She dragged herself toward the faucet. The tick, tick, tick was almost inviting, a false promise of life. The brass was crusted with rust and a greasy film from the damp environment. She knelt, her hands shaking as she fitted the wrench. Kael is watching. He is judging whether he needs to kill me right now. Ren gritted her teeth, wrenching the tool with all her might. The old metal groaned in protest. She had to twist harder, fighting the resistance of decay and the grasping influence of the betrayer entity. She tightened it until her knuckles were white. Finally, there was a decisive clunk, and the tick, tick, tick stopped. The sudden silence was absolute, no longer broken by dripping water. Ren stood up, her hands smeared with oil and rust. She threw the wrench onto the floor. Acceptable? Kael clipped out, with zero trace of satisfaction. That's 4. We have 9 minutes remaining. As they proceeded deeper into the core sector, the effects of the power loss became more obvious and terrifying. The outage was not just lights out. It was physical dissolution. The remaining lights flickered not rhythmically, but at a random, eye-aching frequency. The temperature dropped illogically at random points, then spiked again. They rounded a corner, and Ren froze. Before them, in a concrete wall that should have housed an air filtration vent, there was nothing. Instead, a heavy metal door, without a handle, without a number, without any identifying mark, had been ripped from its locking mechanism. The massive door was torn off its hinges, but it did not open into a corridor. It opened into an absence. There was no shadow. There was no light. Only a patch of space where color and form refused to exist. The space looked thin like newly dried paint. Kael snarled, his voice carrying genuine alarm for the first time. "Turn your face away!" Immediately, Ren whipped around, pressing her back against the opposite wall. Even without looking directly at it, she felt an intense, immeasurable cold radiating from the unlocked passage, sucking the heat from her body. "Protocol 5, Kael said, fixing his light on the opposite wall. "If you see an unnumbered unlocked passage, you must pretend it is solid concrete." What is it?" Ren choked out. "It's a physical error. A door into a failed dimension or an incomplete idea of space. If you look at it too long, it will physically warp, twisting your internal organs into non-Euclidean geometry. If you step in, you will cease to be a unified object." Kael stepped closer. Ren felt him right behind her. "Now you will walk through it," Kael ordered. "No. You will not skirt around. You will not look. You will not question. You will walk straight as if it is dense concrete wall. You must trust the protocol more than your eyes tell you to trust the void." This violated every basic survival sense. Her brain screamed that ahead lay nothingness and incomprehensible death. "I can't," Ren whispered. Kael didn't reply. Instead, he placed a heavy, gloved hand on her head, pressing her eyes tightly shut, and then shoved her hard forward. Ren was forced to step. For the first step, she braced for emptiness, for infinite cold. But a strange thing happened. Her shoe met metal floor. Despite her brain registering that nothing was there, her body moved through a physical space. Yet, as she walked the width of the open doorway, she felt a bizarre suction. Her skin prickled, and for a fleeting fraction of a second, she heard a high-pitched whirring that seemed to originate not from her ears, but from deep within her bones. It was the sound of reality trying to self-correct, and her interrupting it. As she cleared the width of the doorway, Kael pulled her out, cruelly and quickly. They were on the other side. The unnumbered door still gaped, a raw wound in the Archivum structure. "See, Ren?" Kael said. His voice returned to its usual chilling composure. "It is not what you see that matters, but what you force yourself to believe. You walked through a hole in reality because I told you it was a wall. Good. You are still alive. We have only 5 minutes left. They broke into a sprint. The door to the core server room was directly ahead. Kael and Ren burst into the core server room. The air was frigid, thick with the smell of burning static electricity. The massive server racks screamed in agonizing, high-pitched whines. The central control panel timer flashed critical red. 02:47. Kael pointed to a centralized fuse box sunk into the heart of the server banks. Protocol 6. Inspect and replace the core fuse box before 3 o'clock hours, Kael instructed. This isn't standard power, Ren. This is the single cable maintaining the reality filter field. If it snaps, the external reality, the one we lock down, will swallow this place whole. Be fast. Kael handed Ren the replacement core fuse, heavy and ice-cold. He stood still, arms crossed, offering no help. It's simple. Remove the old, insert the new. But you have less than 3 minutes. The time pressure and the fear from the 5 preceding protocols, Tobias's mutation, the cruelty toward Gamma, Advisor T's madness, the memory-eroding poison, and the psychological trick of the unnumbered door, all condensed into this single point. Kael concluded with a cold, almost whispered declaration that echoed in the noisy room. The test is not whether you can insert the fuse, Ren. The test is whether you can insert it after you have learned 5 ways you can die in 10 minutes, and after you have fought your own survival instincts to do it. If you fail, you are a security threat and I will neutralize you. If you succeed, the Archivum has a new employee. Prove you are not just an experiment. Ren hunched down, her hands shaking slightly but her eyes locked on the task, beginning the intricate replacement in the heightened silence. The clock continued its ruthless descent. 02:15. Security Corridor 3 Gamma was a nightmare of light and sound. The darkness was ink-thick, continually slashed by the strobing halogen beams mounted on Kael's helmet. The alarm wasn't a frenzied siren, but a deep, low, resonant thrum, like metal being crushed far underground. You have 17 minutes, Kael said, his voice dry and devoid of warmth, amplified through the helmet mic. The Archivum is not a library, Ren. It is a prison. We contain ideas, we contain failed laws of physics, we contain entities that reality has rejected. Ren was just a shadow trailing Kael, struggling to match his relentless pace. The air was heavy with the stench of ozone and burnt metal. You are not welcome here, Kael continued without turning back. You are replacement hardware. Anyone who requested training involving empathy or humanity has been purged. Sole objective, reach the core server room. If the auxiliary power drains in 20 minutes, the reality filter field collapses. That is a level 5 disaster, reality tearing itself apart. They turned sharply into Security Sector Beta, an area housing simple, yet disruptive concepts. Kael stopped abruptly. Protocol 1, he commanded coldly, standing before detention cell 4. The cell had a small, rectangular viewing port, normally used for observation. ***, do not look directly into viewing port 4. Kael didn't wait. He seized Ren's hand, pulling it up forcefully, making her clamp it over her own eyes. Seal it shut, or I will do it for you. Kael's headlight beam cut through the thick glass of port 4. Inside was a clean, brightly lit room. Standing against the far wall was an Archivum security officer, uniform intact, helmet hovering above his head. He stood rigid, utterly motionless. That is Officer 884? Kael whispered, his voice laced with unveiled contempt. Entity 4 requires no physical violence. Esteel's identifying memory. 884 looked inside and Entity 4 convinced him that he was not a man. He is a wall-mounted emergency light fixture. The low thrum of the alarm rumbled just above Officer 884's head, and he stood there, perfectly still, fulfilling his role as a lamp. Curiosity doesn't just kill you, Ren. It turns you into something else, something stupid and useless. First lesson. You only see what the protocol allows you to see. Kael swept Ren's hand away from her eyes. She swayed slightly, breathing quickly. Move. 15 minutes. They pressed deeper into the sectors that contained entities based on emotion and psychology. The air here was thick, as though sound and feeling had been compressed into a fluid. Sector Gamma Entity, Kael explained. This is an emotional feeder. It requires sustenance to keep it contained. But if you feed it the right kind, it becomes dangerous. They halted before an old digital control panel. The screen displayed two stark options: joy, vibrant emerald green, and regret, dull gray. Protocol 2, emotional discipline, Kael instructed. The gamma entity's psychological classification system must be set to regret, never joy. Kael shoved Ren toward the console. Gamma is a picky guest. It thrives on euphoria, pride, personal satisfaction. If you feed it joy, it quickly achieves full energy state, and it will warp space, turning this corridor into a crumpled piece of paper. Ren stared at the panel. She could hear a faint, low moan emanating from the detention chamber inside, as if someone were being tormented. You do it, Kael ordered. Input the code, Beta 9 Delta, and select regret. Ren fumbled the code entry. When she slammed the regret button, the moaning inside the chamber intensified slightly, then quickly cut out. She imagined the entity internally consuming itself with negativity. Accurate, Kael nodded, offering no praise. The Archivum demands emotional ruthlessness and precision. You are not permitted to feel pity for what you cannot understand. Your kindness is their food. They moved on. Only a few meters ahead was a small, brightly lit office with thick glass walls. Inside, Advisor T, a thin man with a salt and pepper beard, sat rigid before two computer screens. He was completely frozen, hands resting exactly where they had been placed on the keyboard. The left monitor displayed the command, Unlock Detention Bay 7. The right monitor displayed the command, Global Security Lockdown, Level 5. Protocol 3. The Terror of Logic, Kael whispered. Never interfere with Advisor TS dual readout screens. He's stuck, Ren murmured, horrified. We have to choose a command. Help him. Silence, Kael snapped. Advisor T is parasitized by two logical entities. One demands lock, one demands unlock. Currently, this absolute contradiction holds him in perfect equilibrium. He survives pitifully because of the system's insanity. Any attempt to help him, to select one command to free him from contradiction, will cause the two entities to cooperate in a single consensus, tearing the intervening operator apart. This lesson is about accepting madness. Do not try to fix what is broken if it is maintaining stability. They swept past the office, leaving Advisor T permanently paralyzed between two fatal imperatives. They entered the old maintenance sector, where the humidity was staggering. The ceiling dripped, and the smell of rust and mildew was sickeningly intense. The low alarm thrum became more urgent here. 10 minutes, Kael stated. This sector can kill you slowly, with your own kindness and gullibility. They paused next to a cracked concrete wall. Tucked behind a large ventilation pipe was an old, verdigris copper faucet, dripping water onto the floor, forming a small puddle. Protocol 4. The hidden hazard, Kael warned. Absolutely do not drink from the east hidden faucet. Ren suddenly felt a crippling thirst rise in her body. The fatigue and the high humidity made her crave a cold sip. She realized, horrified, how violently and suddenly the thought had arrived. That is the betrayer entity, Kael explained. It is a toxin that permeates through water. It doesn't kill you with common poison. It erodes memory. First, it deletes critical security protocols. Then, it deletes why you are here. Finally, it convinces you that a certain chamber needs to be opened for ventilation or checked for humidity. You become an unwitting tool of betrayal, releasing things that will end the Archivum. Kael tossed a heavy, makeshift crescent wrench into Ren's hand. Anyone touched by the betrayer becomes a ticking security breach. This is a test of proactivity. I don't just warn you, I force you to act. Prove you understand the slow, insidious danger. Lock it down. Cinch it until you hear the teeth grind. Ren swallowed hard, fighting the screaming urge for a drink in her throat. She knelt, using her strength to tighten the wrench around the old copper valve. The wrench groaned, metal complaining under the pressure. She tightened it until the faucet stopped dripping completely. Good, Kael said. Now you understand the Archivum fights not just monsters, but your own lack of vigilance. 7 minutes. Hurry. They were now entering the area closest to the core. Here, the effects of the imminent power failure were stark and unavoidable. Reality was struggling. The light didn't just flicker. It interrupted short spans, maybe milliseconds, when light entirely ceased, as if the universe forgot how to hold the switch down. The temperature plummeted into sudden pockets of chilling cold, only to be replaced by blasts of hot, dry air. We are in the buffer zone now, Kael said, his voice holding a new strain. The walls here are designed to keep things out, but as power drops, what is caged is trying to get loose. They hurried down a narrow corridor, the pipes running along the ceiling clanking under pressure fluctuations. Ren felt dizzy, as though her body was trying to adjust to changing gravity. And then they saw it. It was a heavy, typical Archivum metal door, but something was terribly wrong. It had no number, no identifying marks, and no handle. More importantly, it was unlatched. The massive metal door was ajar, forming a gap no wider than a book's spine. But instead of leading to a dark room or another corridor, the gap led to nothing. Inside, there was no shadow, no light, no color, no depth. This physics seemed to be swallowed. Kael's headlight beam hit it and vanished, no reflection, no scatter. It was a hole in the fabric of reality. Kael stopped abruptly, a rare jerk of alarm. He hissed, his voice warped over the comms. Turn your face. Immediately. Do not look at that sector. Ren instantly faced the opposite wall, her body pressed against the cold concrete, breathing hard. Protocol 5. Solid concrete. Kael snarled, his voice vibrating with tension. Asterisk asterisk if you see an unnumbered, unlatched portal, pretend it is solid concrete. Asterisk asterisk. What is it? Ren whispered, feeling a wave of cold, static air bleed from the gap. It wasn't like wind. It was like the absence of air. It is the reality glitch, Kael explained. A corrupted dimension. It was sealed, but with the power drop, the seals have popped. What you are seeing is not a door to another place, but a place that should not exist. Anything that steps into it, or anyone who acknowledges its existence, is pulled in and corrupted. Kael moved closer to Ren, not turning his face, relying only on spatial awareness for the door's location. They don't die instantly, Ren. They are changed. You'll see bones bend at impossible angles. Your flesh will become other material, hard as ceramic or soft as hot wax. You become a reality error, wiped from the personnel roster, but still existing somewhere as corrupted data. Kael used his hand to push Ren's shoulder, forcing her to keep her back straight, not recoiling. He was preparing to move. You can see it in your periphery, can't you? Its ridiculous flatness? That lack of shadow? Your instinct is screaming. Asterisk, that is a hole. Get away from it. Asterisk. Yes. Ren grit her teeth. The thirst from Protocol 4 was gone, replaced by pure, cold dread. The protocol exists for that reason. The Archivum doesn't care what your eyes see, but what your mind accepts. If you allow yourself to believe it is a passage, your mind will seek explanation, and physics will follow. We must walk straight past it, Ren. I want you to think of it as a solid concrete wall sealed 200 years ago. You will step as if it is something you cannot pass through, even though it is open. Kael started walking, hugging the wall opposite the gap. He moved slowly, methodically, his breath stiff. Ren had to follow, her back pressed against the wall, her face turned entirely into the cold concrete. Every step was psychological torture. Her body resisted, wanting to recoil or jump across the hall to create a safe distance. But Kael walked too close for her to do so. As she passed the gap, she could feel that cold, static current leak through the fabric of her uniform. For one terrifying instant, she thought she heard a sound. Not a voice, but a confirmation, a noise air should not make, as if the glitch was smiling. She craved a glance. Just a quick peek to confirm it was as bad as Kael said. Her self-preservation instinct was being overridden by destructive curiosity. Kael sensed her hesitation. He said nothing, simply drove his elbow hard into her ribs, a painful but necessary shove. "Do not waver," Kael growled. "It doesn't need you to look at it. It only needs you to think about it truthfully. Keep your face pressed to the wall. Feel the grit of the concrete. It is matter. It is real. That is not." Rin squeezed her eyes shut, using sheer force of will to force herself to believe she was walking down a closed corridor. She felt the presence of the non-thing, the proximity of total dissolution. As they passed, the alarm sound seemed to distort, the low thrum becoming higher, sharper, as if time itself was stretching. Finally, Kael pushed her to move faster. Only after they had turned into another corridor, where the lights stabilized and the temperature returned to normal, did Kael allow her to stop. Rin leaned against the wall, covered in cold sweat. She had just walked through a non-existent gap, purely through absolute faith in a cruel rule. She checked the time. 3:52. For minutes 47 seconds, Kael announced, offering no respite. "We slowed down, but you complied. You chose protocol over primal instinct. That is good." They burst into the core server room. The chamber was numbing cold, not the natural cold of air, but the static chill of electricity and liquefied metal. Towering server cabinets hissed with a low electronic whine. Ren's eyes instantly went to the main console. On it, a bright red digital countdown clock flashed. 02:47. Kael strode to a central server rack. "This is the core fuse box. It keeps the reality filter field running. If this fuse burns out, the entire system dies in 3 minutes. You have seen what happens when reality starts to rip." He held up a new core fuse, heavy and cold, made of specialized titanium alloy. "Protocol 6. The time limit," Kael declared. Inspect and replace the core fuse before the countdown hits 00:00. Kael tossed the fuse to Rin. She stumbled catching it. It felt sharp and freezing. "I will not assist you," Kael said, his voice holding finality. He stood still, crossing his arms. "It is a simple mechanical task. Rin, open the panel, pull the old one, insert the new one. Any junior technician could do this in a normal environment." The countdown flashed. 02:20. But you are not in a normal environment. You have been forced to blind yourself, forced to execute cruelty, forced to freeze your thirst, and forced to deny what your eyes see. Kael stepped closer, his face grim and almost disgusted. "The test is not whether you can replace the fuse. Run," Kael whispered, the hiss of static distorting the sound. "The test is whether you can replace it after you have learned 5 ways you could die, become a shadow, or be ripped apart in 10 minutes. It is about whether Archivum discipline can override mental chaos." Run looked at the countdown. 01:55. She knelt before the whining server rack. The old fuse panel radiated unnatural heat, smelling of electrified iron. If you fail, you are a security threat, and I will execute the termination protocol myself, Kael concluded. If you succeed, the Archivum has a new employee. Prove you are not an experiment. Run began to work on the core fuse box in tense silence, broken only by the server hiss and the pounding countdown in the frigid space. She had to keep her hands steady, or reality would unravel. Kael gripped Ren's wrist, not to lead her, but to pull her out of the deadly illusion of the numberless passage. As Ren's body crossed the threshold of what should have been solid concrete, she felt a cold, sharp wrench, as if she had waded through a stream of static electricity. She spun around immediately, but the heavy metal door, which had possessed neither number nor sign that it had just opened, slammed shut with an unreal clunk. They were there, the core server room. The air was thin and brutally cold, almost freezing. Static clung to her skin, making Ren's hair stand on end. Rows of black metal server racks towered like monoliths, illuminated by fierce green emergency lights, but these flickered weakly, like the failing breath of a massive organism. In the center of the room was the core console, a vintage interface table cluttered with dials and monitors. Ren's eyes immediately fixed on the largest display screen, a vivid red digital clock, 02:47. Below the clock, an amber line flashed incessantly. Reality filter field stability. Critical. The remaining time, Kael said, his voice showing no sign of fatigue or urgency, is precisely 2 minutes and 47 seconds. We only need 3 minutes to ensure our survival, Archivums, and perhaps the reality outside. Kael approached the console without touching it. He pointed to a small steel grate low on the floor, near a large power socket where thick cables coiled like hibernating serpents. That is the core fuse box, Kael declared, his voice carrying absolute solemnity. Kael withdrew an object from his armored jacket pocket. It was a cylindrical block of white porcelain, surprisingly thick and heavy. Run could feel the terrifying cold radiating from it, as if it had been carved from a cosmic iceberg. This was the core fuse. Protocol 6, Ren, check and recharge the core fuse box before 3 a.m. This task technically is simple. It merely requires finger strength and a modicum of dexterity. Kael held the porcelain block before her, the green emergency light reflecting off its cold surface. Then why do you need me? Ren asked, her breath growing shallower as she saw the number click down to 225. You could do this in 10 seconds. Kael released his hand, letting the heavy fuse block fall into Ren's palms. This weight nearly made her drop it. Because the test is never about physical skill, Ren. It is about the ability to maintain discipline when your mind is screaming that everything you see is a lie. Kael took a large step back, crossed his arms, and stood between her and the locked door. He became a steel wall. 02:10. Ren knelt before the core fuse box. Her hands began to tremble, not from the cold, but from the cumulative stress of the previous protocols. She could not trust her eyes. She had just been taught that a wide-open passage could be a wall, and a wall could be an abyss. If this console was an illusionary wall, was she trying to install a non-existent object into a non-existent box? She could not trust her emotions, if she felt even a sliver of impulse. Pride, the satisfaction of success, was some gamma entity waiting to devour that joy and warp the conductors? She could not trust what she saw as logic. Kael had taught her to accept contradiction. Was installing this fuse the wrong logical intervention, like trying to help Consultant T? Was she inadvertently activating 2 parasitic entities? She remembered the security guard who became a ceiling light, Protocol 1, and the slow, waiting taste of betrayal at the eastern hidden faucet, Protocol 4. Each protocol was not just a rule, but a deep cut into her fundamental belief in reality, safety, and free will. You hesitate, Kael said, his voice low and sharp as a razor. 01:55. Hesitation is normal, Ren replied, trying to steady her breathing. I have just experienced things no one can explain. Precisely. Archivum never explains. It only commands. Kael took a small step forward. Remember, Ren, the reality filter field is not what protects us from the entities inside. It protects external reality from the concepts confined here. If that fuse is not installed at the correct moment, those starved, distorted concepts will begin to eat the reality of the outside world. Imagine. A city wakes up one morning, and every citizen believes they are a penguin. Or worse, everyone believes gravity is a lie. He paused, the grating alarm bell in the room now sounding like a death liturgy. Your failure will not only kill you, but turn all of humanity into a logical joke. Ren forced herself back to the task. She had to discard every thought of what might happen and focus on what was happening. Kael had forced her to learn how to prioritize the command over the fear. She unlocked the core fuse box. The mesh lid sprang open with a dry hiss. Inside was an empty, black cavity where the old fuse had been removed. 01:30. Ren's hands trembled violently. She guided the cold porcelain block into the cavity. It fit snugly, but she had to push it deeper to connect the circuits. Stop! Kael yelled. For the first time, there was a trace of haste in his voice. Ren froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What mistake had she made? You are installing it with bare hands, Kael explained. His eyes locked on Ren. Subprotocol A7B. Core fuses carry emotional voltage. You must not use bare hands. Throw it out. Immediately. Ren felt a sharp, invisible pang spread up her arm from the porcelain block. It wasn't electrical, but an unseen stinging pain, as if her emotions were being drained. She quickly threw the block onto the metal floor, clattered and lay still. 01:15. See, Ren? Emotional discipline doesn't just apply to gamma entities. It applies to everything. Skill is nothing if you ignore the small details. Now stand up. You have 1 minute and 15 seconds to find an insulating cloth or wipe in the maintenance drawer. Ren stood up, panting. She looked at Kael. He had not moved. He was punishing her for negligence, even as the clock ticked down to the apocalypse. She rushed to a nearby maintenance cabinet, unlocking it with a code she had recently been taught. She grabbed a thick woven cloth, typically used for wiping oil, and turned back to the fuse. 00:58. She wrapped the cloth tightly around the porcelain block. This time, her focus was absolute. She did not look at the number on the clock. She only looked at the cloth and the aperture. Kael is not pleased. She remembered protocol 2. She had to complete the task with ruthless, emotionless precision. She bent down again, carefully sliding the block into the compartment. There was a small, mechanically satisfying click. 00:35. Now it was time to lock it. Ren had to turn a small metal lever on the side to secure the fuse and transmit the power. You get one attempt, Kael whispered. If you are slower than 0.03 seconds, or if you turn the lever without conviction, it will self-destruct and everything collapses. Show me the ruthlessness Archivum requires. Ren closed her eyes for a brief moment, took a deep breath, and compressed all panic inward. She had to become the machine, not the ceiling light but the precise mechanism. She opened her eyes. The clock displayed 00:21. She grasped the lever tightly, and she twisted it. Click. The sound was clear, decisive, echoing in the cold room. Immediately, the blinking green emergency lights stopped. The server racks ceased their moaning and began to emit a steady, powerful hum. The largest screen switched from red critical to deep green. Reality filter field stability. Nominal. 00:16. Run released the lever, feeling her body slump with sudden, painful relief. Kael stepped closer. He stared at the console, then turned to Ren. You wasted 0.05 precious seconds when you installed the fuse with bare hands. You nearly failed due to simple arrogance, Kael said, his coldness now not a mask, but his very bone structure. But you completed it. You overcame 5 perceptual fears, 5 physical and psychological threats, to complete a simple mechanical task. Kael towered over Run, who was still kneeling on the static floor. I did not help you, not because I couldn't, but because Archivum cannot help you, can only teach you the rules. Archivum requires employees more disciplined than reality itself. You must complete the task even if you are unsure whether you are still human. You have demonstrated unquestioning obedience and emotional ruthlessness, the only characteristics of value in this place. He held out his hand, not to help her up, but to give her a new, shiny metal access card. The test wasn't installing the fuse, Ren. The test was the ability to install it after you knew 5 ways you could die in 10 minutes, and after you had to ignore both physics and psychology. Had you failed, you would be a security threat, and I would personally neutralize you right here. Kael looked into her eyes, his voice almost a whisper but full of authority. You did not fail. Congratulations, Ren. Archivum has a new employee. Prove that you are not an experiment but a reliable tool. Your next assignment begins immediately. Proceed to the linguistic classification room and prepare the lockdown protocol for Entity S06. And never touch anything I haven't explicitly stated is safe. Kael turned his back and walked out of the core server room, leaving Ren alone with the new card, the restored system silence, and the cold emptiness where she once believed reality resided.